All right, so now we want to identify, now that you've got a program and you're hopefully working through it and it's working for you, now you want to understand when to make changes. Now, when it comes to hypertrophy specifically, essentially the only goal is to produce the same outcome over and over again. It's to induce progressive overload in order to maximize muscle growth by any means necessary over and over and over. That is different to, say, a sports player or an athlete or something like that, where, let's say, for example, they're a football player, they've got skill work, they've got conditioning, they've got strength, they've got different things that require different phases, they've got the off-season, they've got the playing season or whatever it is, they've got different goals for different months of the year, and their programming and the program design will look very different. You could take a power lifter who's potentially getting ready for a meet, who maybe they're working from block periodization in that they've got one block that is dedicated to accumulation, and then the subsequent block, intensification, and then the further subsequent block before they peak would be realization and then peak, and then they go and perform their powerlifting meet. So in those couple of examples, we've got different goals for different phases, and that dictates what we do. However, hypertrophy is not that. It's just simple, it's linear, we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. That's important to understand because in order to induce the best or elicit the best muscle growth, we need to essentially pick exercises that are effective, do it in a sequence that makes sense, make sure that it's tailored to the individual a little bit, and, well, not a little bit, a lot, and then we essentially just want to rinse and repeat that with as much progression as possible. That's important to highlight because a lot of people get stuck in this trap when it comes to hypertrophy or attempted muscle growth training, where they're just changing their workouts all of the time. And the problem there is not that it's not effective and it doesn't do anything, it's just not nearly as effective as it could be because you're never sticking with the same thing for long enough to really see meaningful progression. Hypertrophy, or muscle growth training, in other words, is about progression. It's about how much can we progress with the thing that is going to work for us. That's what it's about. So, really, long story short, we want to make changes only as and when is needed. If you don't need to make any changes, you shouldn't be making any changes. And that's as simple as that. So I'll give you a couple of examples that might be a little bit more applicable to your actual situation. Let's say, for example, you've designed a program, and I've talked about this in a separate video. Let's say you've designed a program for yourself that's essentially open-ended. You haven't got an endpoint to it. You're just going to prescribe yourself a thing to do in training, and you're just going to do it until the end of the earth, or that's at least the plan. No end to it. Then, along the way, if you notice an exercise stops progressing, change it. Or you can drop the weight and try and push the weight back up again, but most of the time a more reliable way of busting through that plateau is just change the exercise, even just to something similar if you want to keep something similar in. So if an exercise is no longer progressing, and it'll be up to you how to identify plateaus. With my clients, it's if you go 3 weeks in a row where the exercise doesn't even feel any better, you're not able to achieve any more reps, you can't increase the weight and it just feels get rid of it, that's the time that we make a change. So that would be a plateau. If you're working from this open-ended block of training, if an exercise stops progressing, get rid. The second thing is, let's say for example you're doing hack squats or something for 6 weeks in a row and you're getting stronger, but then all of a sudden you notice on week number 6 that it's causing a little bit of pain in your knees. You come back week number 7, the pain's still there but a little bit worse. That's a trend we don't like. So if it's going to start accumulating pain or discomfort in your joints, which can definitely happen, change the exercise. That would be another valid reason to make a change. So really it comes down to, we don't want to be making changes unless we have to make changes. And we need to know for a fact that what we are doing, or whether it's an exercise or a few exercises or a style of whatever, we need to know for a fact it's not working for us in order to validate us making a change. And I think another side note is, every once in a while you'll be coaching a client, if you're a coach, or even yourself, and let's say for example you do this method and you're sticking to the same thing for as long as possible and it's progressing really, really well. Every once in a while you're more than entitled to getting bored. And yes, there's a lot to be said for just getting on with things, but you're also human, and if you despise what you're doing, you're just not going to push yourself nearly as much as you should be or could be. And if that's the case, on a rare scenario, that's also worth considering making a change. But that one's a bit more of a princessy type conversation, but still worth acknowledgement. Now that is essentially a short list of reasons that we'd want to be making a change. Now obviously I gave you one example of kind of whoever is using the open-ended program, and you're just making changes as and when. It might be just changing the rep range on an exercise, it could be changing the variation, You could manipulate how many sets you do of a certain exercise, but really only for a good reason. Really only for a good reason. Now, I've also talked about previously in other videos a programming style of working mesocycle to mesocycle, where essentially you program yourself or a client a mini phase at a time, and let's say it's going to be 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, however long you feel is appropriate. Let's say you're going to prescribe a client an 8-week mini block of training or mesocycle, which has a start point and an end point, because you've calculated it's 8 weeks. And there's a lot of benefits to that programming style, which I'll cover in a different video. If that's the case, the end of that block is usually the biggest point, or the main point, where you're going to assess and look back at what's worked, what's not, and what changes you want to make on the back of your assessment. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're doing a program like that, you should reserve the right to make assessments or changes until the very end of a block. Although usually that is the case. If an exercise all of a sudden starts to hurt your joints or isn't progressing very well or whatever, you can always change it. But essentially, we want to move away from the culture of making frequent changes, and the more that you can just stay on the same program, so long as the program is actually effective and working well for you and producing meaningful results, the longer you can just stay on that and continue to elicit growth by way of progressively overloading effective things that you've already worked out are going to work for you, the longer you can do that, generally over the years, the better you're going to do. And the more unnecessary changes you make that ultimately interrupt potential progressions, that can start to pull you away from as much progress as you can make. That being said, there's plenty of people in the past who've done different workouts every single week and grown loads of muscle. So it's not as if it doesn't grow muscle, it just categorically doesn't grow the best amount of muscle or the most amount of muscle, certainly far away from optimal to be constantly making changes. And we want to move in the direction more of sticking with the same thing for as long as possible. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, shoot them in the group, and I'll chat to you in the next one.